see if this works. I can put this camera here. So I'm here on the UBR on the beach, and I sent in one assignment this morning, and then I decided to take a power walk, and go to the beach as well. So I was just thinking, because I've really been doing yoga with this this yoga block, you know, and also using, of course, yoga mat. But one of the positive things about it is that it's quite good, you know. I didn't I never wanted to have a yoga block before because I don't see the point with it, but it is really good for the back because you can sort of do these you can do certain yoga poses quite a lot easier. As well, you can sort of use the block, you know, for the back bend. So if you, let's say you're doing back bend and you want to get the sort of nice aligned upper back, you know, because the upper back is typically quite stiff, especially if you're doing a lot of you know, sitting in front of the laptops and stuff, you know, and studying or working, you know. So then it's quite beneficial to have sort of bend out the back, and then to actually support the back when you're doing that. Really good using that yoga block, you know. So I actually been sort of using that one almost every day, because you don't need to, even if you don't do a full-on yoga class, you can still do you know, like a short 5 minutes, 2 minutes or something with the yoga block, you know. So it's really beneficial. And so yeah, and yesterday I was typing on this book. So I've been typing on this book that I'm writing, which is quite funny, because I didn't really do that much on it now for a while, but I decided to try and write as much as possible on it, because if I'm finished with it before end of May, I sort of aligning it with when I'm going to be finished with this what is it called, with the spring term as well, you know. So I'm gonna try and get type on that one as well as much as possible. However, I'm not sure how it's going to sort of turn out with its content, because I need to sort of put together some form of content that is not just about my own experience of going there, because I'm writing about my experience going to a place, and but also, you know, sort of align it together maybe with some philosophy or, you know, some different theories and stuff. And there are some really good theories about language, for example, because I was doing some research as well in the course that I'm doing, and we have like let's say it's a foreign language, you know, you have like the way that languages are sort of how should I say, structuring the social reality, and also the reality itself, you know, because you're using language, and the words that you're using, one word, to explain one word you need to also utilize multiply other words, you know, within the same language, and then you're getting the full on scope of what that specific word has for sort of a meaning. But also because of the limitations that languages has. And one interesting aspect is that Arabic is apparently the language that has, like, one word in Arabic is basically also meaning its antagonist, so it means its opposites, you know. So if you're speaking in Arabic and using some word, the specific word itself is also like referring to its opposite, you know, and that's quite unique, you know. So to sort of understand how languages are creating certain things and the interpretation, and, like, for example, if you're writing a paper, you know, like say in the university, or you're doing some form of research or something, you're going to be using language, you know, to sort of explain. If you're doing, let's say, if you're doing social science, medicine, psychology, or anything else, you have to use the language, you know, to write together the paper. But that is also going to be some limitations in what you actually are able to sort of express with only using the language itself, you know. So of course math is like its own form of language, you know, and it has been sort of concluded so far, you know, that math is probably the most you know, objective type of science and language, and maybe not the most objective form of language, but it's used to sort of explain certain things, and you can connect it to other things. But even math itself has to rely on philosophy in its sort of way of explaining certain things. So it's not only about math being fully a neutral science, it also is resting on philosophy, you know. So that means all of these sciences and stuff, they sort of are you know, built on adding together the sort of differences and stuff, you know, to actually explain something that is very complex, you know. And but it's very interesting because within deconstructionism there is all these theories about how language is, you know, how you need to sort of take apart the pieces of language to actually be able to comprehend further sort of understandings and stuff, you know. Because let's say if you're writing most research papers in English, of course if you're doing translated, if you translate them, you probably have to use other types of words, and you may not even find exactly the same word that you are trying to sort of utilize for the paper. But you're going to have to somehow also consider that the language itself is having certain limitations that are allowing for certain results and outcomes that are not going to be fully objective and fully neutral. Especially like objective, okay, depends on how you put in together your paper and so forth, but like neutral, not so neutral, because you're using all of these genus-based forms of words. If you have a study population and you're mentioning each person in that study population as a female, male and stuff, you already are, I mean, that's like maybe biological, but then if you also sort of taking it into these genus-based forms of perspectives, you know, you're adding on one more dimension that is sort of something that is constructed, you know, socially constructed. So you have to consider that not all of these things are fully neutral, and quite complex, you know, to actually be able to get to the essence of things if you're going to try and to not use the to sort of you know, find ways to actually conquer the limitations of languages, you know. But one of the interesting things which I find very interesting basically is that the Arabic language has these forms of antagonists and opposites, you know, within each word, and hence that means that I was just thinking how does the text itself sort of evolve if you're writing things and the word meaning both things at the same time, or it could be applied in both ways. So you're basically having the opposites, you know, represented in the text, you know. So then you probably should somehow be able to get into the essence of things, you know. But yeah, language very like limited, you know, in the way that it is sort of explaining things, you know, and that's very important for any research, like to take that into account, especially when it comes to these philosophical measurements, you know, of you know, if you're reading about deconstruction and stuff, then you probably have to touch on that, you know. One of the philosophers who has sort of done work on deconstruction, and I think he's sort of has established deconstruction as a form of you know, theory, is Derrida. So I actually thought he was still present, like alive, but he actually passed away in 2004. But he did quite a lot of work on that sort of philosophical theory base. I haven't read his full work in any way. I think he was a fan of using a complicated language to explain certain things, because each philosopher, they have sort of their own way of explaining things. Some people enjoy explaining very complicated things, or explain things in a complicated way, but that also restricts the availability for people to actually access the sort of the message, whatever they write down. So that is definitely interesting, and how to avoid, because I was reading now currently one PhD, like, what is it called? Like, someone has done a PhD, and the basic report that was put together from that one was, she was writing about Muslims in Sweden, and a Muslim woman in Sweden, and she basically had to, she was, you know, touching on genus and different social constructions and stuff, but I mean, she has to sort of comply with the fact that these things are present, and the way that the study, like the informants and stuff, are also sort of explaining their own reality based on these things, and but at the same time to try and be objective in some form, you know, to what she actually is doing the research about, so she's not falling into any trap, because, you know, let's say Orientalism and all these things, they have quite been problematic, because they have written certain things in a certain way that has sort of not been so neutral or objective, you know, and then later on been criticized for what they actually have sort of produced in the sense of science, you know. So it's a really, and I think like her work actually that I was reading currently, she was basically, her work was published right before this whole kind of movement of questioning of how science is neutral or not, like how you know, different things are reinforcing certain perspectives and so forth. So anyway, if you are interested in this, you can of course do your own research. I mean, if you can take some courses and stuff, that's also a way. But there's definitely interesting things to learn about the philosophy behind science, because it's very important when you're actually doing your research for yourself. I mean, if you're doing a master or PhD or anything, to sort of have an understanding of where the foundation of science, what it is resting on, and how knowledge itself is not so neutral, and how it is also very much dependent on the language, and what language and words and stuff that are possible to utilize in a certain timing and so forth. So I'm gonna end here, and I might can take you to and show you the. So yeah, I will end here because I'm gonna go and do a more like power walk now before it gets too hot, and then I need to do some other stuff today. So I'm gonna end here.